If you were wondering why Vanguard is called Overdress, don't worry, because that just got answered, as Overdress isn't just a name, it is actually a new mechanic.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and it's Tuesday, which of course means more Overdress news. And they once again didn't disappoint, because we saw the new core feature, or the core mechanic of the new Kagero Trolec, and with it, they introduced or revealed a brand new main core mechanic of Vanguard Overdress, which is the Overdress mechanic. But on top of that, we also got some new Regalia cards for Genesis, and this weekend they revealed or leaked new cards for the Nightmare Doll for Pale Moon in a magazine. So there is a lot of new news to discover and to analyze. So in this particular video, we're gonna talk and discuss the big one, the new Overdress information and the Overdress mechanic. And then next time, in the next couple of episodes, we're gonna discuss the Genesis cards separately and the new Pale Moon Nightmare Doll cards in their own respective videos. So without further ado, let's jump straight into these new Dragon Empire cards, as, oh boy, these are looking pretty spicy. So the first card they revealed to us is, of course, one of the new Grade Zeros in the trial deck, not the starter, because this is Trickstar. And Trickstar has the ability, continues a Vanguard circle. This unit cannot be chosen by your opponent's card effect. So it's basically has the resist effect. This isn't anything special, and we have seen this at the very first set from Q4 during the V-Series, so this is not anything special or anything new. But there is an actual reason why this card has this effect, and it all makes sense once we take a look at a new Grade 2 from the trial deck, which is Verina. And before we even talk about the skills printed on the card, this is basically Chrono Jet Dragon in Dragon Empire, so there's even more reasons for me to main Dragon Empire once Overdress comes around here in the West. So already on the artwork, they have me sold. But on top of that, the card does look a bit different, because the borders around it are something new. And this all has to do with the fact that this is a new type of card. Because his first skill is Overdress Trickstar. You may place this card, stacking it on the specific unit instead of normal calling it to the rearguard circle. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the new mechanic for Vanguard Overdress called Overdress. And how this basically works is that instead of normal calling a card, you can call that card onto a specific designated unit that's already present onto the field and call it on top of it. Then those units will be stacked onto the field, and that new unit will enter the Overdress state. And while it's in the Overdress state, it can acquire very powerful effects that are printed on the card. So in this particular instance of this new Grade 2 Verina, his designated card where you need to call on top of it, where it can enter the Overdress state, is the new Grade 0 Trickstar. So you want to have Trickstar onto the field, and then you want to call this Grade 2 on top of that Trickstar, and then he will enter the Overdress state. And Trickstar will stay underneath the card like a pseudo soul, but it's not really a soul, because they become one unit essentially. Now, then suddenly Trickstar's resist effect makes a lot more sense, because you want to have that Trickstar stick around onto the field as long as possible, so you can overdress it into Verina, which makes a lot more sense. Now, what is the payoff of entering the overdress state for Verina? Well, that is where his second ability comes into play, because his second ability is Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit is in the overdress state, attacks a Vanguard, this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of the battle. Then, cost Soul-2, choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it. So if you overdress this card, it becomes a 20k beater against your opponent's Vanguard for free, which is pretty nice. It's a solid beater for nothing. But on top of that, you have a on-demand pinpoint removal for 2 soul. Now, that's actually pretty decent for resource cost. It's not the most efficient or the most cheap one out there, but for a beginning starter deck, this is perfectly fine. But it's actually pretty powerful because the 10k power is for free, and having a 20k beater out of nowhere, out of the get-go, is actually pretty strong, and have some people shaking in their boots in terms of the power scaling that we might have, because we already can see the power uppage here. But we're going to discuss that at the end of this video. So overall, Verina is a really nice card, and it's a really good introductory to the new Overdress mechanic. But they also clarified some more Q&As about this Overdress mechanic, so let's go over them a bit by bit, and I give some more pointers and explanation to how this mechanic works in more detail. So the first question they answered is, if I do not perform Overdress for Verina, am I unable to call it? No, you can still call Verina. In this case, you can choose to perform a normal call from hand or to perform a superior call. So basically, Verina is still a normal unit in your hand. So if you just want to call it to the Rigger Circle, you can. You can just call them normally like any other card, because they're basically the same as any other unit. The only difference is that if you just call it to a Rigger Circle and not perform the Overdress on its specific unit, it doesn't acquire the Overdress state, thus maybe not unlocking its full potential. And in Verina's case, it just becomes a vanilla 10k beater with 5k intercept, and that's it. It doesn't get the 10k power, it doesn't get the retire skill, nothing. It's just a generic unit at that point. So keep in mind, you can call them, so you're not forced to always run the specific Overdress card, because in this case, Verina has only a specific Overdress skill, but I definitely can see happen in the future that we have Overdress specific cards that have an Overdress state skill, but also just a regular normal skill. So keep that in mind. They're just like normal cards with this extra oomph on top of it. Then for the second question, my Vanguard is grade 1, but can I perform Overdress on my rearguard Trickstar and place Verina on top? No, you cannot. For Overdress, similar to normal call, it needs to be the same grade or lower than your Vanguard. So this is to be expected, because to perform the Overdress mechanic, it's basically normal calling a unit onto a specific designated unit. So it makes sense that you cannot normal call a grade 2 if your Vanguard is grade 1. So it still regards as just calling, and with anything that is restricted to calling, it needs to be the same or lower than your Vanguard's grade. So as seen as Verina is a grade 2, you need to be at least grade 2. So keep that in mind. It's just still the same as normal calling as you would normally. For the third question, is the original dress card Trickstar kept into the soul? No, it's not. You cannot use original dress cards at the cost of soulless. So I didn't really specify this at the first explanation, but the card that's underneath the new unit that's in the Overdress state, it is basically regarded or referred to as original dress. And this card is underneath this unit, but it isn't the same as soul. And the best way to describe it is that, yes, you have two cards on top of each other, but there are basically one unit, so you can see them as one card. Maybe we get cards in the future that interact with the original dress card, but so far it's easier to explain this thing as just one card that's basically two cards on top of each other, and they are referred to as one unit. As for the fourth question, what happens when Verina retires from Overdress? In the event that Verina retires, it goes to the drop zone together with the original dress Trickstar. This does not mean the original dress Trickstar is retired, however. It is the same for when moving to other areas like hand, damage zone, bind zone, soul, etc. So basically the same explanation that I had with the whole soul thing is that they are still two cards, but they are as one. They are treated as one. So if your Verina gets retired, Trickstar gets moved to the drop zone. Only if there's some skill that interacts with Trickstar being retired, or it cannot retire, as seen as Trickstar cannot be targeted with its own skill, that will not apply, because Trickstar will just be sent to the drop zone, so it won't be seen as retire. But at the same time, if Verina gets bounced back to your hand, or it's sent to the damage zone, or sent to the deck, or to the soul, Trickstar will be moved alongside with it, so Trickstar doesn't stay on the field. And this will apply to any Overdress or original dress cards or situations. So see them as one unit, but there are two cards and they're moving simultaneously. Now, the only thing that I find kind of concerning here is the damage zone one. Because if they're two both move to the damage zone, are they then split? Because in the soul, they are just cards in your soul. And when they're in the deck, they're just normal cards in your deck. They just split up. Same as with the drop zone. But do they also split up in your damage zone? Because if that's the case, then Angel Feathers got a significant power buff in premium if Overdress cards actually makes their way in the premium landscape. Because they have the whole Malkuth Malek cards that can send rearguards to the damage zone. So that actually can shoot them damage because you only heal for 1, but you send in 2 cards. So hopefully they explain that if the 2 cards that are in the Overdress situation, that they are regarded as 2 cards in your damage zone or still referred to as 1 card, because that is actually kind of concerning for that interaction. But who knows, maybe they just buff Angel Feathers with that one. So interesting enough. Now as for the 5th question, they answered, when Verina is superior called, can you overdress on top of Trickstar? That is on the rearguard circle. No, you cannot. For overdress, you will place it on the specified unit instead of performing a normal card. So basically, to perform an overdress, you need to perform a normal call. So you can only go from Trickstar into a overdress state Verina by normal calling a Verina from your hand onto the Trickstar. So any card that allows you to superior call the Verina from your drop zone, from your soul, from your deck, cannot then perform the overdress state or the overdress mechanic and can only be called to any other rearguard circle. Or you can call it on top of Trickstar, but in that case the Trickstar will be retired like any other situation where you overload units. So keep in mind, to perform the overdress state, you need to specifically normal call them. So any other skill that allows you to gain advantage by superior calling stuff will not interact with the overdress mechanic. And that is probably a very important balancing aspect of the overdress mechanic, because that means you need to hard draw into those cards, or we need skills that allows you to draw cards and then call them. But at the same time, if a skill forces you to call, that's still a superior call and not a normal call. So that's a very important distinction that you need to know and understand when interacting with overdress. You can only perform overdress by normal calling them from your hand and not via a skill, even though a skill might force you to call from hand, because that's still a superior call effect. Now as for the final question they answered, can Verina in overdress mode intercept? What is the shield value like in that case? Yes, it can intercept because it's still a grade 2. It shifts to the Guardian Circle together with the original dress, and the shield value is 5,000. So basically, you can intercept with your overdress state unit as long as they have the intercept ability, but they only have the shield value of the set unit that's present onto the field. So you don't add up the shield value of the overdress and the original dress unit, only the card that's face up on the field that the players can read. Those shield values, those numbers, those skills apply. The only thing that the original dress unit gives to the new unit that's on top of it is that it basically enters the overdress state. That's everything that's currently applicable to overdress. So that is quite a mouthful for overdress and how it works. So it's basically an extra call on top of a unit that's specifically stated onto the card that you're calling from your hand, but more importantly, it can only happen if you perform a normal call. So we're probably going to learn more about how this works and the interaction of overdress once we see more cards and more skills that have the overdress ability itself. Now, this wasn't the only thing they revealed, because they also revealed the new boss unit for the Kagero or the Dragon Empire trial deck, which is of course Chakrabarti Divine Dragon Nirvana. And oh boy, it's a doozy, because its abilities are act on Vanguard Circle once a turn, cost, discard a card from your hand, choose a grade 0 card from your drop, and call to the rearguard circle. This is most definitely to interact with Trickstar to always have your potential overdress abilities alive. So if you have the grade 2 in your hand, Verina, but you don't have Trickstar onto the field, you can use this effect to discard a card from your hand, to resurrect the Trickstar onto the field, and then call the Verina on top of the Trickstar to perform your overdress. This is basically a setup skill that doesn't cost you anything. You don't gain anything from it, but you don't minus because you ditch a card to gain a card onto the field. A pretty nice skill. It increased the consistency of the Trickstar overdress mechanic, and as soon as we also have this new boss unit from the main set, which looks to be like a grade 3 version of Verina, or in this case Trickstar, it is probably very likely that this ability allows you to always get access to Trickstar and the potential overdress forms of Trickstar, as that new unit from the main set could potentially overdress immediately from Trickstar, or we might see that Verina overdress into on top of Trickstar, and then the new unit from the main set will overdress on top of the grade 2. We don't know how they're going to do this, if you can stack up overdresses, or they always have only one stage of overdress. So we have to wait and see what the absolute specifics on this one are. Now, for the second ability of Nirvana, we have Auto and Vanguard Circle. When this unit attacks, cost counter +1, and this unit and all of your units with overdress abilities get power plus 10k until the end of turn. So for one counterblast, your Vanguard gains an additional 10k power, so it becomes 23k beater. But if you have Verina on the Vanguard Circle, it also gains an extra 10k power. Important thing about this skill is that it only specifies that they need to have the overdress ability. They don't have to be in the overdress state. So if you just call Verina to the Vanguard Circle without calling it on top of a Trickstar for the overdress state, it still gains the additional 10k power. But if you have a Verina in overdress state, it becomes a 30k beater because it gains 10k on its own and then another 10k of Nirvana. And this is where we get into a questionable situation, which is of course sparking again some debate in the community. And instead of making a separate video, I want to clarify and talk about this right now at the end of this video. Because yes, this is quite concerning that we can already see this across the board 10k power play in the original starter decks already. Like, these are numbers that are quite concerning, because your Vanguard is already 23k, then your rearguards can be 20 or potentially 30k, and that's without the Persona Right. If we put Persona Right on top of that, then we have a 33k Vanguard swing with potentially 30 to 40k rearguards on a turn 4 play. Now that's turn 4, not turn 3, but turn 3 we can have 23 and potentially 30k rearguards to the side. That's in the same ballpark as the first year mid-V era, but this is way more powerful than original first couple of sets of V, that are numbers that we can play, that we can push out. And our shield value is lowered, which is kind of concerning. But that is where I want to stop the doom spreading here, because there's one important factor that I believe people are overlooking here. Yes, these numbers look insane, and you can pump them out like crazy because they're kind of cheap with only one counterblast, and for the grade 2 it doesn't cost you anything. But one important thing is, this overdress mechanic is pretty inconsistent. Like, Nirvana only works specifically with overdress cards. It isn't a spread 10k power across the board indiscriminately. It only works if your units have the overdress ability. So if the card pool of the overdress effects isn't big enough, then we cannot justify saying that you have a 10k power across the board. Especially in that starter deck, it's very likely that Verina is the only one with the overdress ability. So that's it. Now, on top of that, yes, Verina can get a free 10k power if it's in the overdress state, but there's an inherent problem with the overdress mechanic itself, and that's pure consistency. Like, yes, it is a specific card, but it's reliant on another specific card to be present onto the field. And because you can only perform an overdress by normal calling it from hand, makes the mechanic even more restrictive. Because you might get access to some of your overdress cards by a superior call effect, but then you cannot activate their overdress abilities or their overdress state, and they just become normal cards. And that means that, yes, you can potentially have a 30k beater, but to get that 30k beater, you not only need to have Trickstar onto the field, then Verina in your hand, and Nirvana onto your Vanguard Circle. Those are 3 specific cards to be on 3 specific zones. Now, of course, Nirvana helps you with the consistency's sake of allowing you to resurrect the Trickstar from your drop zone, but if you don't have one in your drop zone, this ability does nothing. And at the same time, if you don't have Verina in your hand, then again, it might be fancy and all, but Trickstar doesn't have the overdress ability, thus it cannot acquire the 10k power. So even though this sounds kind of concerning on first glance with the numbers that we can create, we still need to be realistic here, and so far there are some consistency issues at stake here. And now the implementation of the right deck makes a lot more sense, because now we can focus on making our deck work with the overdress mechanic and increasing consistency of attaining overdress abilities with our main deck, and keep the whole right consistency aspect to the right deck itself, and we don't have to concern ourselves with that aspect as well. So implementing the right deck was a very smart decision, seen as how Overdress worked. Because this type of mechanic, I've seen a lot of players speculate about a mechanic like this in Vanguard for years and years, but every time that idea has been shut down because it, combining with the fact that you need to have a right consistency in your deck built into it, is almost an undoable task. But now, with the right deck, it is pretty doable, but at the same time, there's still some issues here with consistency, say, which might balance this out in the long run. So we have to wait and see what the other decks are going to do and what the power scaling is going to be in the first couple of sets to have a good picture of how good everything is going to be. And this is also where I want to end off this video, because I've been talking about this for long enough. And we also need to talk about the Regalia units and the new Nightmare Doll cards as well. Also, one interesting thing is that today's livestream, they said that they were going to reveal the main gimmick of the Dragon Empire deck. And next week, we're going to get the main gimmick of the second starter deck, which is, I believe, Dark States, if I'm correct. But this is an Overdress mechanic. So does that mean that the Overdress, the way how Overdress works, differs between nations? Or is it just that maybe Dragon Empire is the only one that gets Overdress, as their whole gimmick was evolve your buddy? I'm very curious in which direction they might take. Maybe Overdress is a very specific mechanic that is only suited for specific units, or it's a very broad thing that might have different specifications for each and every single nation. To understand that and have answers to that one, we have to wait until next week once they reveal the main gimmick of the second starter deck, and I will probably answer how generic Overdress the mechanic is and how it might function in other nations as well. Also, another thing is that we're probably going to get more premium news sooner than later, because somewhere down the line, probably around the end of this week, they said something about a newsletter or an FAQ, something that explains or goes more in depth on the impacts in premium with the new Overdress information and stuff and all that kind of stuff. But they're kind of vague on when they're releasing it, because they still want to implement certain things before they want to release it to the public. So expect some premium updates very, very soon. I cannot give you specific dates because they didn't give us specific dates, but it is coming. But with that said, I want to know all your thoughts on the new Overdress mechanic, as well as the new cards they revealed for Dragon Empire. I am super excited about these cards because not only do we basically have Chrono Jet Dragon in Dragon Empire, because we have Chrono Dran that can evolve into a Grade 2, that might also be able to evolve into this Grade 3 Chrono Jet. So I'm very happy. I don't care if the cards are good. They look pretty cool and pretty good on first glance, but I don't care if they're not good enough for the future long, because they look awesome. So I cannot wait till we see more and we have a better understanding of how these cards are going to work. So let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!